Good morning, everybody. I apologise for being a couple of moments late there, but we're here now, ready and raring to go. Thank you very much for registering for our second Meet the HOSPA webinar. It's 10 a.m. It's just gone 10 a.m. It's Wednesday, the 13th of May. We are still in lockdown here in the UK, but with slightly less restrictions than this time last week. My name is Jane Pendlebury. I'm the CEO of HOSPA, the Hospitality Professionals Association. I'm joined today by 4 more of the HOSPA board, from whom we can learn a lot from their long and varied hospitality careers. We have a loose agenda, which you should be able to see on the screen at the moment, which we will aim to stick to. Please use the questions tab at the bottom of your screen to join us with any questions at any stage, and I will present those to the panelists when appropriate. Thank you for joining us. I do hope the next hour will be beneficial to you all. And let me start by introducing Rob Maloney.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rob Maloney. I'm the director of Kerry Robert Associates, specialist finance recruitment specialist to the hospitality sector, and both in the UK and overseas. And for the last 15 years, I've been involved with HOSPA as membership officer. And I'd like to hand you over to Peter, who will carry on his introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Peter Jones. I'm responsible within HOSPA for the professional development. I run the professional development committee and oversee the current range of HOSPA training programs and awards. Background: I was soldier, academic, chief executive of a group of hotel schools, project director for the Edge Hotel School, and now I'm actually part of the eHotelier organisation, most recently responsible for producing a report last Friday on hospitality in the post-COVID world.
Thank
David?
you. Michael, would you like to?
Yep,
sorry, David.
All right.
Go on, David.
Okay, I'm David Pryde. I'm the head of IT for the Strand Palace Hotel, and historically been with groups such as Red Carnation, Bespoke Hotels, and Intercontinental, so sort of encompassing from boutique through to the larger multinational blue chips. And until recently, I was also chair of the HOSPA IT community. Michael.
Good morning. I'm Michael Haywood, as you can tell from my accent, from southern climes. I run my own consulting firm, Haywood Hospitality Solutions, and our primary focus is on leadership development and high-performing teams. My background in developing high-performing teams has been primarily through revenue management, working for IHG with the managed estate for UK and Ireland, and prior to that, Accor, both in the UK and in the Pacific region. So one of my great passions is in the area of revenue management and seeing that develop as a profession, which is what brought me to join HOSPA and to end up on the board of HOSPA. Back to you, Jane.
That's brilliant, Michael and David, Peter and Rob. Thank you very much for those introductions. I think we're going to start actually by going straight back to Michael, who is going to talk a little bit about revenue management and balancing the noise of the data. If you'd like to explain that one, please, Michael.
Yes, Jane and I love to have a bit of a catchy tagline for what we're talking about with these sorts of things. So when we were having a chat about what we thought would be interesting to cover for you all in this webinar, I think we all are pretty comfortable with the idea that there's a lot of noise out there at the moment, a lot of opinions, a lot of ideas being thrown around as to what's happening, when things will change, what the impact is on our business. From my background in revenue management, I would suggest to you that the very best outcomes achieved by revenue managers is when we have the skill and the curiosity to combine what the data is telling us with what we are hearing and what maybe our experience tells us. One of the big challenges we have at the moment, I hate using that word that we've heard so many times, unprecedented, but it really is. There's no point saying, well, from my years of experience, this is what I think will happen. Even though in my background, I've experienced everything from electricity shortages in major cities. We had one in Auckland for a while. We had a gas crisis in Melbourne. We've had SARS. We've had swine flu. We had the tsunami impact in my region when I was in that region. There's so many different things we can talk about. 9/11, of course. They've all been big impacts on different cities and in different ways and different markets, but this is just completely different. So what good revenue managers need to be doing, and the reason why companies need good revenue management more than ever, is that revenue managers have the curiosity to take in information from a whole range of people, whether that's a sales contact with a major client, whether that's something you see on a webinar like this one, or the STR webinars that are being done across all markets, and I'm finding them fascinating at the moment. Looking at what's happening in China, people are talking about green shoots there, hearing people talking about revenge travel, when people are allowed to travel again, will there be this surge of domestic travel? You hear all of that noise, and a good revenue manager then has the curiosity to say, well, if that is going to impact my business, and if I want to know how that's impacting my business, how would I expect to see it? So you need to be looking at your pickup, your pace, you're on the books. You need to look at your segmentation, and I almost cringe when I use that word segmentation, because in my experience of major companies, and even with the independents that I've done contract work with over more recent years, segmentation is at best imperfect, particularly where you have large corporations with global segmentation. You need to know what are the most important revenue streams for your business, and you need to be able to look into those to see what's happening with them. Market segmentation doesn't generally differentiate between inbound and domestic very easily. That's certainly something you need to be looking at. It's quite good generally at differentiating between corporate contracted business and best unrestricted rates, because it can do that well. The best revenue managers take the noise and the theories and the opinions. They then look at the data, but you're always trying to qualify the data. If there was this kind of customer behavior, where would I see it? Take the example of domestic. If that is what is going to go through the roof, then you definitely need to be looking at your best unrestricted and look at where people are booking from. So to try and encapsulate all of that, talk to people, listen to people, check it against the data that you're seeing, and don't rely too much on another hotel in the city, because David's hotel might have a whole lot of business that is unique to him. Another hotel that a friend of mine might be in that's next to Wembley Stadium, they can forget about it until the stadium is open, and that may be their mindset. I may have a tourist attraction near me that's going to open much later, and that's been an underlying driver. Or perhaps it opens earlier and I have an advantage there. So have the curiosity, listen to everything, and then, okay, challenge yourself. Well, if that is true, how would I see it? That's what will get you to be as successful as you can be, as fast as you can be. Thank you, Jane.
Great.
Any questions on that?
We do have a question actually from our president. Harry Murray has asked a question, and I know we can't talk about pricing or any specifics on pricing, but Harry's concern is that there will be heavy discounting when lockdown is lifting, and with margins already being wafer thin, occupancy likely to be low. What are your views on that, Michael?
Two quick things. I don't see the benefit in discounting in a small market. It's the classic Sunday night argument that we've had forever. There isn't a lot of demand, and discounting won't change that. It's just a race to the bottom if you do that. I would urge caution. If I look back at what happened after 9/11, people desperately threw themselves into discounting on the OTAs, and New York City in particular became a global case study of how an entire market can get addicted to low price OTA, high commission levels. That is not the best way to get your business out of trouble. Revenue managers need to be careful here, because chasing top line at the cost of bottom line is not a good way to go. But I would say, contrary to what others have suggested, trust your revenue management systems more than perhaps you normally would, because these revenue management systems have hundreds, if not thousands, of hotels around the world that are seasonal, that deal with this opening up from zero. So the algorithms are built to handle demand and pricing recommendations. If your domestic market is building and there's no need to discount, your system is able to identify that and support it with pricing recommendations. So really do make sure you understand what your systems are recommending and be really cautious about discounting. I know if I was competing against someone who was dumping rate, I'd be thrilled, because as soon as demand comes back, everything that they've dumped and dropped below me on, I'll never let them have that back. I will absolutely keep that margin as the market begins to come back. So be careful about the one that goes out the back door when the demand is building.
And on that point of demand, Neil Tolley, who's listening in to us today, has asked about creating that demand. Is there a way to create that demand, or do you think it's already there, pent up and waiting to explode?
I would say there's no way to create inbound demand. There is a way for us as an industry to encourage people to come back. And there's a lot being talked about at the moment about kite marks for cleaning standards. We've heard about Accor, Hilton and Marriott with their cleaning standards. I believe Radisson are doing that kind of thing as well. I think it's really important, and maybe the other guys will pick up on this, that we get a message across to the public that we have a new level of cleanliness and hygiene that we adopt in our hotels. The comparison again I'd make to that is 9/11. All air travel stopped out of the US. Once it restarted with higher levels of security. Those higher levels of security became the norm. I would suggest that there are higher levels of cleanliness and hygiene which will need to be adopted, and they may well become another one of these fabulous phrases we're hearing a lot of, a new normal. And I don't think cost cutting in housekeeping, anyone who's had that issue in the past, that's not going to be sustainable. There has to be a level of confidence that the public can have to allow us to bring that demand back quicker.
Great. Okay. And then just a couple of quick fire ones for you, Michael, because we need to give some others some airtime as well. Guy Lewin is asking, are room rates likely to rise to make up for the additional expenses to deal with extra health and safety and hygiene requirements?
It's going to be very hard to. Simple answer, most of our rates are heavily driven by our market competitive environment. So it's going to be very hard to do that.
Okay, and then a quick answer on this, another one from a follow-up question from Neil Tolley. Should the government be encouraging people at the right time to get back out to hotels and hospitality in general and to spend? I guess that, well, given the audience today, that's got to be a resounding yes from everybody.
Yes, but for individual revenue managers in individual hotels, that will look different depending on who your market is. I saw a question come out about whether city hotels or countryside hotels are going to be in more demand. Anything I say on that really would just be speculation, but that's why we came up with this balance between the noise and the data. There are going to be loads of opinions. Mine is just another one of them amongst millions. Look at your data, watch what's actually happening so that you can really be on the edge of responding to it as best you can as quick as you can.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. And that role, a revenue manager, as we know, has become crucial in any hospitality environment now, which leads us nicely on to a quick chat about staffing with Rob Maloney, who knows an awful lot about recruitment and has, I believe, some opinions on talent and furloughing and potentially the awful word redundancies. But if we could hand over to Rob now to just give us a general overview on staffing, that would be great. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Jane, and thanks, Mike. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've been in recruitment for 31 years within hospitality. I've never seen anything like it in terms of recruitment. I think we can't really talk about recruitment today. I think the important elements, I think, is really to look at staffing welfare and retention against inevitable redundancies, really. I think the companies that are doing a really good job with communicating with their staff on a weekly basis, whether it be local level, head office level, interested in their welfare, their well-being, preparing them ready to go back to work in terms of maybe safety training, which I know we'll talk about a bit later. I think these are the areas that companies need to work really hard at. The tough decisions are yet to come, I think, in terms of the levels of staffing coming back. I think the furlough scheme extension is great, but it's probably putting off the inevitable in some cases, or perhaps there'll be some more flexibility to allow against business levels. But I think, at the end of it all, when we come through this, I think that staff will, the staff that remember what the companies did for them, how they looked after them, generally, were caring towards them. This will guarantee the work commitment from your staff, whether it's at operations level, at management level. I think everybody wants to get back in there. And I think when we get the chance to go forward again, then I really think that, that it will show, it will show even greater than the companies that perhaps, if you remember at the beginning of all this, some companies were trying to put in, layoff clauses in contracts. Staff haven't forgotten that. I talk to people and they're not happy about that. They are waiting to see what's out there because they remember that fact. Companies were wrong to do that. And there's some great cases of companies that, already they're getting staff ready in terms of training for safety, protocol procedures. Yeah, I'm seeing, the companies that are really good communicators were the ones I think have got the greatest chances of preserving their staffing levels and perhaps maximising this awful situation. But as you all know, I mean, from about August onwards, I think, particularly with companies with over 100 employees, don't forget they've got the 45 days consultation period to go through. It'll be very interesting to see what happens and how companies can hang on to the really good people. So I think that's my sort of message. I don't know if others agree on that, but that's the general perspective that we're looking at the moment.
Yes, I believe those employers that have treated their staff as well as they possibly can during this will be rewarded with more loyalty at the end. I've got a question for you, Rob, from David Derbyshire, who I know that you know. He would like to ask you if you feel that the staffing mix will change in the new world post-COVID-19. For example, will hotels and catering establishments need fewer customer-facing staff and more housekeeping, cleaning staff?
I think that's interesting. I mean, it may even be a case where staff actually they just the old days of departments within hotels and perhaps their boundaries, I think will perhaps dissipate even more. I think people will have to do more jobs and be more part of a team, a bit more like maybe perhaps like if you go to Waitrose, you're employed to do a number of tasks. It's not just a task, and I think that you may see that more within the hotel environment. I think it'll depend on the type of business that you're in as well. If it's upscale, I think there's always a sort of client expectation in terms of front office delivery and service delivery, but I think, you know, everybody will have to learn to adapt, and I think customers will adapt to that as well. It may help long term with, you know, with cost base perhaps, but yeah, it's going to be strange for a while. You're going to have customers going into some hotels, they won't go to reception, they'll go straight to room. They would have paid obviously through credit card. There'll be a lot less contact, but I suspect with upscale businesses particularly, you know, the customer contact is still everything. So that's my sort of view on things.
I'm sure David will be picking up on some of those technology innovations when he gets the chance to speak. And it works quite nicely for you to hand over to Professor Peter Jones shortly because of that staff confidence. Are you concerned, Rob, about staff maybe not wanting to go back to work if they don't feel safe?
Yeah, undoubtedly. You know, there's a huge, I mean, in terms of the safety side, I mean, I was talking to one of my clients earlier in the week, and I was just interested to see from an employer liability stance, you know, are there any differences, what companies are doing, if you like, to ensure safety from their side, but obviously, particularly for their staff, to make sure things are in place. And I think, you know, a lot of companies are working very closely with their insurance companies to making sure that what they're putting into place against government standards and also against the insurance company standards are correct, and if you like, are ticked off. And you know, I think as I said earlier, I think there are companies that perhaps are using the flow training systems already, where staff are getting trained ahead of going back to work. I think that's particularly, especially some of the larger brands are certainly doing that. And I think that's a leaf that could be taken out of any book for whether it, you know, it's more difficult for independents, I know, but I think that approach can only help to sort of, you know, satisfy that need to be safe and to start thinking that way even before you're going back. I mean, obviously there are smaller teams already in place where they're actually, you know, practicing this already. But yeah, I think, you know, staff need to be assured, and obviously there's to a point there is a legal responsibility by the employers as well. So there's a huge amount that can be done there, and it is being done there, but perhaps in different degrees.
Great, thank you. So again, that takes us back to the responsibility of the employer and making sure their staff feel safe, which leads us nicely back straight into Peter about instilling confidence, both in the staff and on the consumers, on the guests. Peter, can I hand over to you, please?
Yeah, sure. I'll pick up on something that Rob said, which I think is very important, which was about the way that the companies are behaving now in relation to their, in particular, in relation to their staff. Those that actually are looking after their staff during this period, they're developing a series of confidence and trust in the brand and in the organisation, which is absolutely critical to how those things are taken forward. Where that communication is not taking place, then you're going to find that those are the businesses which, in my opinion, will ultimately suffer, because that communicates to the consumer. You know, we're all aware of those examples that have been highlighted in the press where staff have been suddenly laid off, and how that's resonated with the public, because public sentiment has changed significantly. And I think one of the things that the industry is going to have to grapple with is actually, how do we recognize that change in public sentiment? How do we understand what the consumer is now looking for? Because they're not necessarily looking for what we had assumed in the past, which is the product, if you like. What they're looking for now is confidence. And how do we actually demonstrate that nature of that particular confidence? And that's got to be with the staff as well as the consumer. If the staff don't have trust and confidence in you, then you sure as hell the consumer's not going to have that either. And that's how it's communicated. So it's a lot of it's about culture. A lot of it's about the culture of the organisation. And I would go even further to suggest that in terms of things like staff and staff training, you almost need to press the reset button and start again with everybody from the ground up, because everything is going to change. Your brand standards will change, your manuals will change, the world's changed, and we've got to recognise how that impacts on our business. And so all those things are really very critical to making sure, A, that you can open safely, but more than that, you can open with a degree of confidence that's going to translate into the trust of your staff and the trust of the consumer.
Got an interesting question.
I think I'll stop there.
I've got a question for Eric Rogers, which I'm not quite sure if we're entirely the right audience to answer this, but Eric asks, what about liability towards guests? Could a guest sue a hotel for catching COVID during a hotel stay? I guess the element of proof would be a tricky one there. But could that liability...
Jane, if I could just...
Go, Rob.
Yeah, I was just say on that note, I was just going to say maybe you should treat it a bit like the food poisoning side. I think it'd be quite difficult to prove.
Yeah,
there
could
are
be very difficult to prove. Yeah. But I also make the point,
I think that's the one.
But don't forget, from an employer's point of view, you also have a vicarious liability in relation to your employee. So if your employee does something which is actually counter to what you are recommending or your protocols are in place, and the person then falls ill and they blame it on whatever that situation might have been, then you as the employer still have that vicarious liability. So you need to be aware. That's why training is so vitally important in this, because it's not just training in saying, well, here's the risks, this is their health and safety, this is, these are our new cleaning regimes. It's actually training them to understand what all those issues are. It's about getting an empathetic relationship with your consumer, with your guests. And how do you do that when you're 2 meters apart? Complicated. We understand that, but that's why the training element of it, I think, is so vitally important. And I would be suggesting to anybody, any employer, that if you think through, you go through your risk assessment, every single element of that risk assessment is also a training need.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to work out how you're going to do that in relation to your guest.
Just to build on what Peter's been saying there, to have that training for staff so that they understand there is a new standard of how we work is quite critical in making those staff feel confident about their return to work. Yep. And I've been really impressed in talking to hoteliers who I really respect, who have properties in more rural locations, that they feel the responsibility not only to their staff, but to their community around them. And the case that I keep talking about is a friend of mine with a gorgeous historic pub with fantastic food in a valley in North Wales, Rob, your neck of the woods. Their little community, their village, is really worried that there'll be all these Londoners pouring out in their Chelsea Range Rovers, and the way they feel is the plague will come from London and descend on their gorgeous little village, which has been in this safe little bubble. So that business owner feels a responsibility absolutely to their guests. We all get that, we're hoteliers, and clearly to our staff, but also by extension to the community around our staff as well. And you have, when they feel like you're taking it seriously, which means the training and the standards and the enforcement of the training and the standards. F&B's had this for ages. Rob mentioned food safety. If a chef turns up and they're clearly unwell, you don't let them start preparing food for people. You send them home. Now the same thing will have to apply to our room attendants, our reception staff, even someone working in the back office. If you turn up and you clearly have a bit of a temperature and a bit of a tickle in the throat, just go home. And that has to be so much stronger than it's ever been, amongst all the other things Peter was talking about, but completely agree with Peter.
So from your perspective, Peter, as Harry Murray has pointed out, it will be like opening a hotel for the first time, and a Gantt type plan should now be in place ready for the green button. I think that goes back to revenue management as well. It's almost like starting with a clean sheet. Peter, do you have anything to add to that?
All I would say is that I think Harry's right. You need a Gantt chart for reopening. It's just like starting a new business, really. But you have to recognise that every single step of the way, and you've got to go outside the building, you've got to go back to your local community and so on. You've got to understand the nature of the potential risk to everybody that's involved, with your supplier, with your supply chain, whoever else you collaborate with. How are you going to control access in and out of the building for everybody? So all of those things have to be thought through. So you need a very clinical, analytical approach to the way that you're going to manage all those risks. First of all, you've got to recognise them. You've got to understand where they might be coming from. And then once you've done that, you can chart them, you can plot them, and then you work out, well, who's going to be responsible for that bit? And therefore, what training do they need? So I make sure that I can exhibit that or develop that confidence and trust, not only throughout my staff, my local community, but also with my guests. So it's a big ask we're talking here. It's not just a little operational fix. It's rethinking through the whole business from the ground up.
David Derbyshire has got a comment on that the pace of change for these standards and processes will accelerate processes in ways that the vaccine development has been rushed through as well. There's a lot of planning needs to be done for these. Have we got time for all that planning? And is there a danger that businesses rush into things and that may turn out to be bad for business?
Yeah, I think
we
right,
have to be planning. We have to be planning, but we have to be prepared to change those plans. We have to be fluid and adaptable. We're hearing people now talking about, well, beer gardens are okay because outside space is safe. Well, okay, that's what we're thinking right now, but look, whatever we come up with.
And you're right. You've got to be planning now. And actually, I think you've got to take the time to plan. You've actually got to invest in that planning stage now. It's no good rushing to open, because the worst thing that can happen to you, you rush to open and 3 weeks later you've got to close again. So wouldn't it be a lot better to actually think through all of these things, come up with a very timely intervention, a very considered plan, something that you communicate well. You've got to communicate it with your staff anyway, but you communicate it well with your staff. Once the staff feel confident with it, then that confidence will actually expand to the community, to the guests and so on. But you've got to get that bit right and take time, but you should have been starting long since. But the trouble we have is we tend to wait for the guidelines. Well, what guidelines? And if we wait too long for those sorts of things, then we're going to be in that rush situation. I would rather that you start now on the basis that, let's assume that everybody that's coming in to my property potentially is carrying a disease. So we're talking about infection control, and we're doing it right from ground zero. And let's build the business up again from that. But you're going to have to think through every single aspect of the operation and how that operation will need to change in order to reflect that not only that mindset, but also how we're going to build the confidence and trust.
I have
just come back a step as well.
Sorry, just on Peter's note of opening too quickly. I mean, there are going to be cases. I think councils, for example, well, certainly in like Stockholm and places like that, they have councils regularly checking operations, and if they're not up to scratch, they close them down. So if you rush, it's going to be stop-start anyway. Yeah. Sorry, Michael. Yeah.
That's right. I just wanted to pick up on Harry's point about similarities with opening a new hotel. I would suggest it's more similar to a seasonal reopening of a resort hotel. And the reason I make that difference is we've got businesses that had a lot of established relationships which shut down. Those relationships are still there. But when I'm working with hotels, resort hotels in Spain, or hotels in the Adriatic is another area that I work with in Croatia, They are very much looking at the Russian market. When will that come back? The German market. They'll look at their wholesale markets. They'll look at their book direct strategies. But in the preparation for opening, they've got a whole lot of relationships there that they will work with. And so from a revenue management point of view, all the planning that Harry and Peter are talking about, and Rob with recruitment and David with technology, that would go into an opening of a new hotel, from the revenue management and commercial point of view, you've got all those relationships with your corporates, with all these different types of business you've got. Your plan needs to be flexible in that as well. And you need to be communicating and looking for the triggers. Okay, when do we think the US inbound market will come back? What do we need to do to engage with those relationships that we've got? When you open a new hotel, you don't have strong working relationships. People wait for you to open, and it kind of builds from zero. Recognize what you've got and how all of that needs to be worked into your plan from a commercial point of view.
Brilliant. That's great. So all this planning, I think we can hand over nicely to David now, who I know has been doing a lot of planning and a lot of research on technology during this time, where his hotel remains open for, I believe, mostly military staff. But David is now going to talk to us about the plans and the thoughts he's had for technology, both the threats that have been received during the lockdown period and also plans for reopening. So if you'd like to take the stage now, please, David.
Yeah, thank you. And I would echo agreeing, it's this planning, or at the moment where we've been working through scenario buildings, platforms, because we don't know exactly what the new world is going to look like, not the least of which the government guidance and things constantly changes. So we're starting to go through the model that says, how do we start the business to generate cash flow? How do we start the business to work with our existing client bases and then maintain the social distancing and all this? Are we going to open with a food and beverage offer or not? Or are we going to become like everyone is at home and relying on your Uber Eats and your dial-in food? And they're the challenges, not just for our hotel, but for everyone, is the pre-COVID business model cannot just simply be picked up and repeated. The risk assessments and everything else, but also just logistically, physically within your building. One of the things we touched on was the rush. There was also, unfortunately, a very big rush to shut down. And one of the things that concerns me is there's been some very positive things, particularly from a technology perspective, because all of a sudden everyone's embraced the cloud, work from home, and all those things that the IT geeks have been going away going, we should work from home more, we should use video conferencing. And everyone's been forced to take these things on, and that's been fantastic. However, the adoption has been very quick, and it's crucial that if it wasn't planned and thought through in its initial implantation before opening, and because this will still become part of the new norm, make sure that we take the time to review that. So we now have people working from home. What access to the data and information do they have? Are you still GDPR compliant and PCI and all those sorts of things? Do you need to go and tweak these things going forward? Then on top of that, as I was mentioning to Jane, the first 2 weeks from COVID being announced, so this was, look at my little quick stats here. So as of the 2nd of March, there was a 400% increase in phishing and email solicited viruses and things, all related around COVID-19. And that has exponentially just grown over time. So we're seeing a lot more the fake information. Here's the latest COVID news, click on this link. Please don't click on the link. So you need to, just like with everything before, know your trusted sources, etc. In addition, whilst we've been in lockdown, because of these things, there's been a lot of updates. The most famous one, Zoom, in 6 weeks has had 6 update versions. So these things are changing very quickly. If your hotel has been closed during this period of time, you've had your skeleton crew in there, flushing toilets, doing the security, maintaining your insurer's liability, However, has the IT also being maintained? Have you been running night audits, or when you want to open, are you suddenly going to have to run sort of, 43 days worth of night audits consecutively? All those, they sound like the silly things, but they're the things when you say, right, we're going to open in 2 weeks, and then it's suddenly like, oh, maybe we're not. And then comes back once you open, be ready to start saying, I'm now about to go and change my market segmentation, Michael. Yeah, because statistics, you need to track this, and it's going to be ever so important for the revenue systems. So again, we're going into a time of incredible fluidity, a lot of change. So some of the things that I've been looking at in terms of, we've been reviewing how we check in and maintaining social distancing, and we know that people are going to start moving to adopt mobile apps and those sorts of things because they want to reduce their contact points. The thing that I'm stressing to my business is reduce contact, increase engagement. And that's where the technology is here. There is a lot of technology out there that can help you achieve that. There are a lot of solutions out there looking for a problem. So make sure that you take a very review it very carefully, and different solutions. The solution that fits a 4-star London hotel will not work necessarily for a country house, etc. But there are things out there that will help facilitate these things. And it's back to your risk assessment. Who is my target audience? What's my demographic? Where are they coming from? So have I got the plague coming from London, or is it the same people I had before, just repeat guests wanting to resume life as normal or as near as they can from before? There's going to be, without a doubt, a big uptake for the likes of the apps to do your pre-check-in, and people are quite comfortable to physically handle their phone. So therefore, you can have those levels of engagement by bringing the engagement to the individual and their devices, the areas of within their hygiene and their control, and that builds customer confidence. The other one, in terms of when we were talking about the staff training, all the hygiene initiatives, is look to make sure that you don't just adopt these things and have the ability to track and demonstrate that you're maintaining those standards, but also communicate it. Use those platforms of engagement to make sure that your customer sees that, so that they can see that, one of the things we use a service optimization software that says when the housekeeping, etc. What we can very easily do is push a feedback that says, right, you can see the count. The public areas have been cleaned 15 times today, 16 times an hour later, and so forth. And it's those very low-key, low-tech solutions, but they build customer confidence, because that's going to be the differentiator, and where the brands are looking at doing brand alliances, be it Hilton and Dettol or whichever, where they're trying to do. Yeah, but you can do that even in a country house hotel, an independent. Those sorts of things can still be engaged. The days of just a simple checklist on the back of the public services doors is possibly not enough, because people want to know that sort of things when they come in. We had the discussion, one of the pieces of technology I looked at was thermal imaging, so that you can, particularly for conference centers or anywhere where you think you're going to get large volumes of people, particularly coming through into your public areas in mass. There are some solutions now that will measure up to 10 people per second, and it will take their temperature within 0.3 of a degree. And then it brings it back onto a tablet, so your doorman can discreetly ask someone, oh, sir, would you like to come and sit down? You seem that you've registered a little bit warm. Can I get you some water? Would you like to sit here away from everyone else? While we establish, why are you hot? Is it you were running? I've just jogged to the car because I forgot my bag. Or the individual says, well, actually, you're right, I am feeling a bit hot and a bit of a dry tickle in my throat. And you're actually doing then the service and you're demonstrating to your customers by the fact that they see you have to publicly make them aware that you're taking their temperature, that those things can build confidence. The challenge for us going forward and opening is there's lots of technology out there. There's lots of things that can aid your business. It's all going to require money and investment and time. So one of the things in your planning, as Peter talked about, was that making sure that you look to say, what are the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins, the ones that can build instant confidence without the investment. So one door in, one door out, those sorts of just simple flow things. I'm talking about the no tech almost, but it's about building confidence, understanding who's coming through your door so that you can invest in the right technology. And one of the things, certainly depending on your ownership model and your investment thing, is generate cash flow, because until you start seeing cash flow coming through, that you know what your market segmentation is starting to look for or where there's opportunity, you can then say, right, now I can, this opportunity is a market piece that says, actually people are starting to indicate they would love to be able to just walk straight to their room. So mobile key becomes attractive. But even Hilton's had mobile key in for a number of years, and I think it's still seeing at about 5% uptake. It's not necessarily the be all and end all. There are easier ways to get around it. You can just simply have a pre-check-in, and when they turn up, because they've pre-checked in, there's their key sanitized in an envelope, ready for them to tear open and take their nice clean key for themselves for the rest of their stay. I'm promoting technology, but everything doesn't have to start with technology. It's about using simple systems to increase your awareness, increase your communication, increase your engagement, reduce your contact. And the contact is not just for the guests, it's for your staff. You need to make them feeling happy. Other areas we've looked at is more in your back of house operations, and just starting to look at saying, like, how do I make, we all know back of house in hotels is how many people can I square it, put into a small space. What's the average height of an employee? Maybe I can squeeze a mezzanine floor in here. It is revenue per square meter, and back of house is lost revenue. That said, how are we going to do social distancing? On the positive notes, we've already demonstrated that our workforce can work remotely. We're already starting to say, actually, finance doesn't have to sit in the hotel. It needs to come and visit the hotel. It needs to have, via our collaborative Teams or Zoom or whatever mechanism you're using, you can have that regular communication and engagement. And these are the things that sort of says, okay, now I can free up space. Now I can start to have social distancing and work environments that are safer for our employees. The other thing we're looking at is, what I would call commodity items. Keyboards, I personalize them. That's my keyboard, my mouse. It goes in my bag with my name on it. It sits on the shelf. Then I don't have to have a desk and a workstation dedicated, which is an asset tied up. We can start to free those things up for employees, but they still have the peace of mind and the confidence that they're maintaining their own personal hygiene levels. So they're the simple things, but they're the things, as we said before in our planning, is look at the risks and look for the solutions. And sometimes the solutions can be simpler, and then sometimes there will be, going forward, as we understand more about the opportunities, is going to be, right, how do I use technology to drive that engagement, build confidence, but build new revenue streams? So if, for example, your food and beverage space does not lend itself to do social distancing, many a hotel I've worked with in the past, that it used to be sort of almost like a narrow corridor that weaved its way around the building, and you just sort of think, well, 2 meters space and I can't even get past. But that's where we then go back to well, hang on, do I look at a mechanism for them to work with partners outside of the hotel? So yes, I might lose the food and beverage margin, but actually now I'm not employing staff, I'm not providing all these other things, but I can take 10% off the Uber Eats or whatever my strategic partners that I work with, and then you introduce those pieces. So there's a lot, as I said, there's a lot of opportunities out there, and technology is there to assist. But as we go, it's taking it in baby steps. It's have those, what's going to generate me cash flow, build confidence, and reduce risk. So it's all about reduce contact, increase engagement, and they're the wins at the moment. But behind the scenes, as we go through this, keep data security, because as with COVID, we're going to start being required, be it, and it's not there yet, but my mindset, I've watched these things before in terms of with SARS and things, is we will start to have the track and trace, which everyone's talking about. And you will start to find that hotels are going to have a requirement to hold more personally sensitive information. GDPR now steps up another level. So don't neglect the security and maintaining, preserving your business value, because the last thing you want to do is have the damage that says, oh, they're ever so hygienic, they're a wonderful hotel, but they lost all my personal information that I have an underlying health condition or whatever it might be. Having that information means you can deliver better service and build confidence with a guest. So it is very much, we want to use those things to help, but we need to protect the security. So they're the things, it's about plan, assess, risk assess, mitigate, plan, risk assess, mitigate, etc. As we go. But that's my my tenet. Any questions?
There are some questions for you, David. Thank you for that. I think all of these topics that we've covered today warrant an hour by themselves, actually, but maybe that's further down the line. Andrea Shaw has commented on your comment about finance people that they would love to come out of the basement. So yes, please, they're very happy to rush down in the basement anymore.
Yes.
Declan Gallagher has commented about your thermal imaging and suggests also taking a temperature check of all employees coming in and out of work, or into work more specifically, as the way forward to offer further protection both for the staff and the guests coming in. So I'm sure anybody is using those tools for their guests will also be using them for the staff as well. So we're coming into the final 7 minutes, I think, of our webinar today. So I'm just going to look at these questions, and so they're going broadly now. I have one for Rob, and anyone else is welcome to comment, but if we can start with Rob, from Harry. What are your views on reissuing contracts to all staff to include multi-skilling? And we haven't got time for a long answer on this, so just some quick answers would be very useful. Thank you.
I think that will happen more, but I think it needs to be done in a certain way, because again, we're looking at this, staff trust, staff well-being, staff confidence things. But I can see it happening a lot more. I mean, in some contracts, if you look at it, they do ask you to work in different places. So I don't think it's going to be too much more to extend to that, to be honest.
Great, thank you. And Carl has picked up on something, David, that you said. He's asking, how do you think the conflict of the rush to privacy, GDPR, and the need to hold personal health data will resolve itself?
I think that will, again, like everything where we've asked for our customers and people to give us more information to have it to improve services, it comes about engaging with them and conveying confidence. So things like, hotels adopting and being audited independently for security and compliance, and be it on your health and safety or your hygiene standards. But it's those sorts of things. I think privacy is, there's a number of countries around the world that are introducing the track and trace apps, and already the privacy question is coming into play. As with everything like that, it's really the what's in it for me. If I give you information, what do I get out of it? And if it's I'm going to share with you, I have underlying health conditions or concerns, but because you're now aware of it, you're able to structure the product offering and my guest experience to help that allay those fears or concerns or address my needs, then people, I think, will be more willing. Again, it's back to this element of build, security by design, the underpinning words from GDPR. It is we're going into a new world. We have an opportunity to make sure that when we implement these things, it's not here's a problem, here's a fix, let's go. It's here's my problem. These are the possible solutions. Which one is going to work best for me, and what's the risk and the impact and all those things, and how do I manage and control this? And I think traditionally, certainly on the technology, hotels have, I think, for a long time been quite reactive, and we just follow the trend, or suddenly we you know, the hotel down the road is doing mobile key, I need to do mobile key. But the hotel down the road is a business hotel, and I'm a leisure hotel, and the leisure people really don't care. They want to come and talk to the reception because they want to find out what's going on. So it is just remember to stop, take stock. What's my hotel? What's my engagement? What's my risk model? It's completely different. Every hotel is going to have a unique risk model and operational model, and it's making sure that we do these. But I think that people will still be hesitant to share information unless you can demonstrate and prove that you're taking the right due care.
Yeah, and that goes back to when you were talking about the other technologies, Michael's point on look at the data, don't listen to all the noise. Got a question from Simon Grech on looking at airports and the way they have operated for some years now on technology. Do you think hotel guests will accept similar technology now? Again, I just need a quick answer on that because we're running towards the end, our deadline.
Over time, I think they will, and it's the same thing. It's if we did it in the airports because we could see that it was in our interest, in our protection, and they took duty of care, that you could see that, you know, you can't, only the security person can see the X-ray. It's not put on a big screen for everyone.
Yeah. Okay, Mark Reed has mentioned that. Well, I was one of my questions was going to be that the brands are issuing a lot of standards on many topics, which sometimes leaves the independent or the smaller chains behind. But Mark has commented that there are a lot of suppliers out there that are producing checklists for hoteliers as well. So we will try and get those listed on our crisis support page on the HOSPA website as well. But there is support out there for independents as well as the chains as well.
I think the critical point with that, it's one thing for us to do it all ourselves internally, including the training that Peter was talking about. It's another thing altogether to have something which customers can see, and they can make an informed decision to choose to stay with a business that has higher levels of cleanliness and hygiene than maybe one that's desperately cost-cutting and feeling on the ragged financial edge. I think the value of what you invest in all of this, because the training and everything else, it costs, and you're investing, you need to get a return, and that comes from customer preference, which comes from the customer being able to make an informed choice. That's one of the big challenges.
Yeah, which comes from the customer having confidence. And actually, I tend to take the view that actually with smaller, the independent businesses, in some ways they might be slightly behind the curve of the really big brands, but in a way they've got a better opportunity for creating that customer confidence in the way that you described, because they're part of that community. If you've got that confidence within the community, if the community start to use you, then of course you've got cash coming into the business. And I take the view that I think everything is going to start local. It's not going to suddenly explode into a big mass international markets. It's going to start very locally. It's going to grow on a very incremental basis. And if you can get that confidence within that local community, that's a much better place to be.
Right, brilliant. And I've got a comment from Mark Platt, who says that multi-skilling will be the key to assist in survival with flexibility. So that sort of wraps it up, I think, quite nicely. And now we have actually reached our time, so it's my job just to thank you all, and just to remind you that any opinions expressed today are exactly that, opinions, and should be treated as such. If you need formal advice, then please approach your professional advisors or come to HOSPA for a referral. A big thank you to my knowledgeable panel and for all their wise words today. Please do visit the HOSPA website to see our crisis support page and also the positive news that we are posting during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Details of the next webinar, which will become a regular feature now on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, are listed in the, or will be soon listed in the events section. Thank you very much for listening and for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully in the not too distant future. But thank you very much for joining us today, and it's goodbye from us.